Okay, so today we are diving into a region that feels like it's constantly well on a knife's edge,
Yeah.
the Israel-Lebanon border.
Right.
You handed us a stack of sources that paint a pretty intense picture. Simmering tensions, power plays, a whole lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
So our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to untangle this knot of a conflict and see if we can pinpoint just how close to the edge things really are.
Yeah. It's a knot with a lot of tangled threads, that's for sure. You've got Lebanon battling a crushing economic crisis, a currency that's practically worthless. Then you've got Hezbollah, more powerful than ever within Lebanon, yet facing threats unlike any they've encountered before. And on top of all of that, Israel itself is dealing with internal divisions and a public that's increasingly wary of conflict.
It's interesting you say that Hezbollah are facing new kinds of threats, because one of the sources you said
Yeah.
mentioned Israel using, of all things, pagers?
Pagers.
It's a recent operation against them.
Amazing.
Pagers. It sounds like something out of a cheesy spy movie.
Right.
But
yeah.
the implications are anything but. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it sounds almost comical at first, but it was a brilliantly executed operation. Israel managed to plant explosives on thousands of pagers issued by Hezbollah and then detonated them simultaneously. The casualties were significant, but the real genius of the operation was its psychological impact.
I bet. To suddenly have your own equipment used against you like that, it must have sown so much chaos and distrust.
Absolutely. Imagine the paranoia within Hezbollah's ranks. They pride themselves on their operational security, their ability to outmaneuver Israel. But this pager operation showed a level of infiltration that is deeply unsettling, to say the least. Suddenly, their communications, their chain of command, everything is suspect.
And that psychological blow has to be factored into their response, right? It's not just about the physical damage, it's about how this makes them look.
Precisely. Hezbollah's entire identity is built on resistance against Israel. To not respond forcefully would make them appear weak, vulnerable, which is a dangerous image for any organization that thrives on public support and the perception of strength.
So what you're saying is that this pager operation, as vintage as it sounds, has essentially backed Hezbollah into a corner. They have to respond, but any significant escalation could have devastating consequences.
Exactly. It's a high-stakes game of chicken, with both sides staring each other down.
Yeah.
And to make matters even more complicated, we have to factor in the wild card in all of this: Iran.
Right, because Hezbollah isn't just calling the shots on their own. They're essentially Iran's proxy army in the region.
That's one way to look at it, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. Hezbollah is more like Iran's insurance policy, their ace in the hole.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What do you mean by that? Okay, insurance policy. I'm listening.
Hezbollah's existence, their ability to threaten Israel, is what keeps Israel, and maybe even the U.S., from considering more aggressive action against Iran, particularly when it comes to their nuclear ambitions. Hezbollah is a huge deterrent.
So Iran needs Hezbollah strong and viable, maybe even more than Hezbollah needs Iran.
In a way, yes. If Hezbollah were to be significantly weakened, or worse, destroyed, it would be a massive blow to Iran's regional influence. It would leave them vulnerable, and it would embolden their adversaries.
So knowing that Iran can't just sit back and watch this unfold, even if they wanted to, they're in a tight spot too then, aren't they? Because if they do get directly involved, wouldn't that risk a much larger conflict? I mean, wouldn't that be a worst-case scenario for everyone?
Exactly. It's a delicate balancing act for Iran. On the one hand, they need to project strength to show they won't let Hezbollah be crushed. But on the other, any direct military intervention would be incredibly risky.
You mentioned the possibility of them supplying Hezbollah with more sophisticated weapons. I remember reading in one of these sources that there's concern over Hezbollah potentially acquiring anti-aircraft missiles that could significantly disrupt, if not shut down, Israeli air superiority. Imagine the impact that would have.
It would be a game changer. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But providing those kinds of weapons means risking further escalation, perhaps even inviting retaliation directly against Iran. And that's a scenario nobody wants.
It really highlights the global stakes of this conflict. We started by talking about pagers, and now we're talking about the potential for a wider regional war. It's a lot to unpack, but you're doing a great job laying it all out. But I have to ask, if Hezbollah is in this precarious position and Iran's walking a tightrope, why doesn't Israel just go all in and try to eliminate Hezbollah once and for all? I mean, there's definitely a segment of the Israeli public and some politicians who are pushing for exactly that.
It's a tempting thought, but a dangerous one. It's easy to underestimate Hezbollah. People see them as a militant group. They are well-trained, highly organized fighting force with years of combat experience. Remember the 2006 war? Israel went in expecting a quick, decisive victory. They ended up bogged down in a costly and inconclusive conflict.
Right, the element of surprise wouldn't really be on Israel's side this time either. Hezbollah knows an attack is a possibility. They've had years to prepare, and you've said it yourself. They're more entrenched than ever.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And let's not forget the potential for massive civilian casualties, something that would be a propaganda coup for Hezbollah and further inflame anti-Israel sentiment around the world.
Can you elaborate on that a little?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
In today's hyper-connected world, perception is everything. Hezbollah understands this. They know that images of Israeli airstrikes of Lebanese civilians caught in the crossfire would be beamed across the globe instantly. It would be a public relations nightmare for Israel and play right into Hezbollah's narrative of resistance against a powerful aggressor. They would become a global symbol of resistance regardless of the actual military outcome.
So even if Israel were to achieve a clear military victory, it might be a Pyrrhic one coming at a tremendous cost, not just in terms of lives lost, but also in terms of international opinion.
Exactly. It's a lose-lose situation. And we haven't even touched on the economic fallout.
It does feel like every path leads to a pretty grim outcome. So where do we go from here? What are the potential scenarios we're looking at? So we've established that this situation is about as precarious as it gets. But I'm curious, what are the potential scenarios we're looking at? Is another full-blown war in the region inevitable?
I wouldn't say inevitable, but the sources definitely paint a picture of a region on a hair trigger. The big takeaway for me is how easily this could spiral out of control, even without either side intentionally wanting a full-blown war.
Okay, so if it's not necessarily intentional, what could set things off?
Miscalculation is a big one. Both sides are on edge, and there's a real risk of misinterpreting the other's actions. We've seen it time and time again in history. One small incident, one wrong move could escalate rapidly.
Hezbollah's recent missile strike on Tel Aviv comes to mind that felt like a huge escalation given everything else we've been discussing.
Absolutely, and that's another thing to consider, unpredictable events.
Yeah.
These could be internal developments within either Israel or Lebanon, or even external factors like a global crisis that diverts attention or resources. It's impossible to predict everything, and that's part of what makes this situation so volatile.
So we've got miscalculations, unexpected events. It does feel like this whole thing is just one spark away from exploding. What's the most likely outcome then? What are we left with after that spark?
That's the million-dollar question, and unfortunately, there are no easy answers. Even if Israel were to achieve a decisive military victory, which, as we've discussed, is far from guaranteed, it would likely come at a tremendous cost. We're talking about widespread destruction, a humanitarian crisis in Lebanon, and a global propaganda war that Israel would be hard-pressed to win.
And of course, there's the human cost, something that's easy to overlook when discussing geopolitics and military strategy. The sources we looked at barely scratch the surface of what everyday people in Lebanon are experiencing, how this constant tension and uncertainty are impacting their lives.
It's something to reflect on. This isn't just an abstract geopolitical chess match. These are real lives, real families caught in the middle of a conflict they have little control over.
You've given us a lot to think about. We've gone from vintage espionage tactics with the pagers to the brink of a regional war, highlighting the global implications this relatively small, geographically speaking, conflict has on the world stage. One thing's for sure, the situation on the Israel-Lebanon border is as complex as it is volatile, with no easy solutions in sight.
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder of the interconnected nature of our world and the high stakes involved when tensions escalate in a region as volatile as the Middle East.
Well, on that, we're going to leave you to ponder everything we've unpacked today. It's been a deep dive into a complex and frankly unsettling situation. We've only just scratched the surface, but hopefully you've gained a better understanding of the forces at play and the incredibly high stakes involved. As always, we encourage you to seek out diverse perspectives and continue exploring this issue for yourself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.